Hello, hope you're doing well. So the subject for today's video is probably something that's been done plenty of times before now, but I haven't done it yet, and I've been listening to Disney soundtracks all week, so here we are. That's right, today I'm going to be redrawing 4 famous Disney characters as the Dungeons & Dragons class I think would suit them best. Kind of reimagining them to suit a fantasy RPG setting, and giving you guys a bit of insight into the thought process that went into them. Anyway, now that the context is out of the way, let's get right into the designs. So right off the bat, I should probably mention that I didn't have any particular order in mind when I started drawing these pieces. Like, I'm not doing these in order of preference or anything, it was pretty much just a case of drawing whichever one I could think of a visual for in that moment. Anyway, first up on the roster is Belle from Beauty and the Beast. And the D&D class I picked to base Belle's redesign around was the ARTIFICER class, which to the best of my knowledge is a pretty recent, potentially even unofficial or homebrew addition to D&D 5e. I'm sure if I'm wrong about that, you're going to let me know about it in the comments. But yeah, Artificer is a class I myself have played before and had a ton of fun with, so I wanted to shine a bit of light on it here since it's probably not one of the more well-known classes. So Artificers are basically magical inventors. I think the official notes about the class on D&D Beyond describe them as something similar to magical engineers, where rather than casting spells, they will use whatever tools they have at their disposal to create magical devices or chemical concoctions. From what I could tell, artificers are pretty much the people who make the magical items that you might find in your local merchant store or deep dark dungeon, and they love learning new ways to make new things. Initially I had thought of redesigning Belle as a wizard, since those are also characters that typically need to be pretty book smart to make full use of their abilities. But even though one of her main traits as a character is being very smart, since her dad in the Disney movie is an inventor, an artificer seemed like a bit more of an interesting choice. You see, that's part of the thing I love about doing these kinds of character redesigns. Not only taking the visually iconic elements of a character and, twisting them and reshaping them and trying to keep them recognizable, but also drawing influence for the new design from small elements of their original story, as well as the new role that they're being put into. Like, in this case, going from fairy tale village girl/princess to dungeoneering inventor. What elements could logically stay the same? What elements would need to change? What could be added on to really sell the new visual you're creating? It can be pretty fun adding bits on and taking them away while trying to find the right balance between honouring a character's original design and applying your own stylistic twist. This is especially true when it comes to redesigning a character who has multiple outfits, since you have to choose which one you want to work from. For instance, in Belle's case, when I was looking for a reference picture for her, all of the search results that came up were of her big golden princess gown, and although that is a look, it wasn't quite the look I was going for. Even though that outfit is probably the first one that comes to mind at the mention of Beauty and the Beast, for an artificer it's probably not the most practical. Having said that, redesigning a character is never a matter of just transferring them as they are from one setting to another, because then you could just copy and paste them, you wouldn't have even had to redesign them in the first place. So I did try to do a few concept sketches for Belle based on her ball gown, taking elements of it like the colour scheme and the long gloves and the ruffles and trying to apply them to a practical inventor's outfit. But in the end, everything I came up with was still just too glamorous. And I think we can all agree that in the world of dungeon crawling, function should definitely come before fashion. At least 9 times out of 10. So in the end, I based Belle's redesign around the first dress she wears in the movie, the simple blue one with the white shirt and apron. I wanted to keep the original ratio of blue to white in this outfit roughly the same to keep it recognizable, so I opted to turn the blue dress itself into something halfway between an apron and a set of overalls. The kind of thing you might imagine a blacksmith would wear in a fantasy setting. I also added a few extra layers and a pair of leggings underneath the apron for extra protection against any potential workplace mishaps. Since her hairstyle in the movie is pretty practical anyway, I left it as it was. To really push the idea that this version of Belle is an inventor, I added on a few elements as well. A pair of gloves and a set of eye goggles, because again, any good inventor practices workplace safety. A number of pouches, tools and vials, as well as a large backpack to hold all of the schematics and parts she might need for her inventions. Since this was the first of the Disney redesigns that I worked on, I really didn't know what to expect when it came to how it might turn out, but overall I had a ton of fun with it, and it really only made me look forward to working on the other ones even more. Next up is Cinderella. Initially I thought that Cinderella would be a tough one to choose a D&D class for, but after I thought about it for a while, I settled on one that I really liked. You know how I mentioned with Belle that when you're redesigning or repurposing a character, you can have a bit of fun with choosing other elements from their story as design inspiration? Well, although Cinderella's story is definitely a magical one, Cinderella in and of herself isn't a magical character. But she does have a fairy godmother, a powerful being who bestows magical gifts upon her. So while Cinderella might not be suited for the role of a wizard who gets their magic from study, or a sorcerer who has magic running through their veins, there is one D&D class that really would seem to fit the bill. Yep, making Cinderella into a warlock. To be honest, it's probably not the choice most people might have been expecting for her. It's not what I was expecting either, but let me explain my reasoning. So for any of you who might be unfamiliar, the Warlock class in D&D is one that lets the character gain magical abilities from a pact or contract that they make with a higher power called a patron. These patrons can be anything from an eldritch monster to a demon to an all-knowing immortal, and the character gets different abilities depending on which patron they make a deal with, like a demonic patron gives you fire powers, right? But one of the types of powerful being that a patron can be is a fairy. Archfey, technically. They're fairies, shut up. Anyway, I have been real fond of Warlocks ever since the second campaign of Critical Role started up, and the dynamic a Warlock can have with their patron really felt like the perfect thing to put a Dungeons & Dragons twist on the tale of Cinderella and her fairy godmother. The pact that a Warlock makes with their patron can also be materialized, I guess, in a number of forms, either a spellbook, a magic weapon, or an animal companion. Since Cinderella has a bunch of animal friends who help her out in the Disney movie, I thought it'd be nice to give her a little rat friend up there on her shoulder. Now, as far as Cinderella's visual redesign is concerned, in contrast to Belle's costume, Cinderella's is one that I did want to be based off of her iconic princess gown. You know the one, a bluey, silvery, glittery number with a very defined silhouette. And of course, glass slippers. Couldn't be doing without those. But typically when you hear the word Warlock, you might think of, well, like an angry wizard, right? Certainly if the Google image results are anything to go by, Warlocks on the whole seem to be pretty edgy people. Long robes, hood, maybe, very foreboding. But the fun thing with D&D is that you are never bound by any preconceived notions that might exist about the kind of character you want to play. The only limit is your imagination and how well you can roll a dice. And since we're here to do some fun Dungeons & Dragons redesigns as opposed to gritty fantasy reboots, I decided to stay true to the original friendly, sparkly vibe that Cinderella was rocking. For her outfit, I cropped the ball gown to a shorter length and added tougher leather sections to the top half. But since I wanted to try and keep that ball gown style silhouette, I also gave her a sparkly cape, which in turn let me keep the poofy shoulder pad things. I also turned her glass slippers into a set of glass armor for her legs and arms. It's probably not actual glass, since that would be horribly impractical, but again, there are no limits in D&D, magical armor can take on any aesthetic you damn well want. Another key factor in keeping these characters recognizable while I redesigned them was maintaining their color palettes. And I feel like that might sound obvious because, of course, I'm not going to color Cinderella's blue dress bright red or anything, right? What I mean is that color choice, and more specifically the shades and tones that different colors can come in, is very important to bear in mind when it comes to portraying what a character is like. That's why a lot of Disney villains have darker color palettes that feature a lot of reds, greens, and purples. So, for example, Cinderella's original palette is light blue. And although I did add a few slightly darker shades for the leather sections, I made sure to balance them out with more light tones in the glass armor and the cape. Unless I was going for a gritty reboot design like I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't want to darken her palette entirely, because then she might look like more of a villain than a good guy. We might be changing her genre, but we're not changing her alignment. On the whole, I'm pretty happy with how Cinderella here turned out, especially since after I finished her colouring I went back and lightened some of the line work on her cape to give it a bit of depth. It was a nice effect, and I actually ended up using that lighter line work method on sections of most of the other characters as well, so very glad I picked up on it here. Next up, we have a character from one of my favourite Disney movies, Rapunzel from Tangled. The class I decided to base Rapunzel's redesign around was Cleric. Of course, clerics in Dungeons & Dragons tend to get their magical powers from gods and deities rather than magic flowers, but still, I kinda had to go with the cleric, because Rapunzel's got the whole healing hair thing going on, and clerics typically are the default healing class in D&D. I'll admit, not as complex of a thought process behind that decision as there was for the other two, but I'll be damned if it isn't on point. Having said that, even though I picked a class for Rapunzel pretty quickly, I was still a bit torn by the end as to whether she'd be better suited to being a cleric of the light domain or the life domain. Just like the other classes I've mentioned so far in this video, there are a bunch of paths that clerics can choose to follow that influence the kind of power they wield. I feel like a light cleric would be a good fit for her because of the fact that her healing powers in the movie make her hair glow and she has the whole lantern and sun motifs going on. But to the best of my knowledge, life domain clerics are a bit more in tune with the whole healing and bringing people back to life side of things. I don't know, I think I'm leaning a bit more towards her being a life cleric, but you know what, it's still up in the air and you all are welcome to make your own conclusions on that front. Also, slight change of topic, but one surprising thing that I noticed while working on these redesigns was that, although normally when I'm drawing a character's eyes, it's the one furthest from the camera that gives me the most trouble, when I was trying to use this Disney art style, that completely switched around. The eyes closest to the camera became way harder to get the shape right for, and eyes on the far side of the face felt way easier to get right. Honestly, the only conclusion I can draw from that is that if you learned how to do art by drawing anime characters, trying to draw Disney cartoons will apparently really throw you for a loop. Anyway, the starting point for Rapunzel's visual redesign was her hair. It's one of her key features as a character, and I knew it'd have to be up in that braid she gets at one point in the movie, because if it was down, I don't think it would even all fit on the page. So I wanted to make sure that whatever costume I designed for her would balance out well with that bulkier hairstyle. As well as the reference picture I had open of Rapunzel's original costume, I also had a bunch of artwork from games like DnD and Pathfinder open so I could use them as inspiration while I worked on this one. Based on all the references I could pull up from Google Images, and based on my own experiences playing D&D, I could tell that as a cleric, Rapunzel was going to need something to wear that would be a bit sturdier than her classic pink and purple dress. After all, the last thing you want is for your healer to go down during combat because they weren't wearing proper armor. One of the only main features from her original outfit that I kept the same in the redesign was the puffy sleeves from her dress. I replaced the dress entirely with sturdier layers of leather armor and trousers, as well as a fabric half skirt to sort of echo back to the silhouette of the original design. I could have probably left her barefoot since she has no trouble getting around without shoes throughout her movie, but I found a really nice looking pair of open-toed boots in my reference pictures tab that look like they go quite well with the rest of the design, so I added them in. And of course, I had to give her a frying pan. Probably counts as an improvised weapon, right? Since I changed her outfit pretty much entirely, this was another instance where I really had to bear the original palette of her dress in mind while I coloured. Just like with Cinderella's, whenever I added extra dark tones, I made sure to try to balance them out with lighter sections. I also added the sun symbol from the movie onto the pauldron on her shoulder to act as her sort of clerical holy symbol, and filled in the flowers in her hair with a few random colours that were either selected from or wouldn't contrast too strongly with the rest of her palette. Overall, I think this is one of the pieces I'm most happy with from this set. I really like how her outfit turned out, and I'm very happy that I just managed to draw her in the first place and still make her look halfway decent with that Disney-esque drawing style. Especially since she not only had to be translated from fairy tale to RPG, but from a 3D animation to a 2D illustration. And last but certainly not least, I couldn't draw Rapunzel without drawing Flynn Rider. Honestly, half of the reason Tangled is one of my favourite Disney movies is because Flynn here is one of my favourite Disney guys. He was also by far the easiest character to choose a D&D class for, since in his movie he's basically already filling that role. Flynn, of course, had to be a rogue. More specifically, a thief. Like I said, no real surprises there. In its own way though, the fact that he was already pretty much a walking D&D character made it harder to redesign him as one. His original Disney design stripped all the key features of a roguish character down to its bare essentials and bundled those essentials into a good, simplistic design. So I had to do a fair bit of addition to bring it up to the level of complexity and general extraness that I think we've all come to expect from a D&D character design. The first hurdle to get over though was just drawing his face. I mean, I know in the movie Flynn makes a point of the fact that no one can seem to draw his nose right, but I honestly felt like I had way more trouble with his hair. Like, I had to go back and redraw it about 5 times because I could just not get it to look right. He took the longest time to sketch out of any of these characters, and half that time was spent just trying to make his fringe not look weird. I also wanted him to be to scale with Rapunzel in case I ever wanted to put both of their drawings side by side, so I put her finished drawing on another layer while I sketched so that I could draw Flynn's proportions accurately. So that'll be why you might see her flicking in and out of view while I'm drawing Flynn here. Since, like I said, Flynn was already a roguish character with an outfit designed for a thief, the process for redesigning his look consisted less of actually redesigning or altering any existing parts of it, and more of adding bits on top of what was already there. Since Dungeons & Dragons is more combat heavy than your standard Disney fare, I tried to steer his outfit in a direction that would be more suited for battle. I gave him an extra satchel, a pair of daggers, and some armor and padding for his arms and legs, as well as a little neckerchief that he could maybe use as a mask if he needs to do any extra sneaky work. I also gave him a hooded cloak in a darker colour than the rest of his palette to give everything that last push into that real fantasy genre aesthetic. But since rogues are a class that typically tend to do their best work in the shadows, I didn't feel as much of a need to balance that darker tone out with lighter elements as I did with the other designs so far, since a slightly darker palette was better suited for his new role anyway. This was the last of the designs I worked on for this batch, and at this point I felt like I was really in the swing of it. I'd gotten pretty used to drawing in a more Disney-esque style, and I definitely had a lot of fun playing around with a male design after drawing 3 princesses in a row. Not that I didn't have fun drawing them as well, but, you know, guys are really more my area. Although I will admit, I think by the time I was done with this drawing, Flynn ended up looking a bit closer to the way he does in the cartoon series of Tangled, if any of you guys have seen that. But no, actually, you know what, it counts, it's a success. I do not want to have to draw his face again, it took so long. Anyway, that's just about it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed that. Did you agree with the classes I picked? Do you maybe have ideas for some other Disney protagonists you would like to see given the RPG treatment? If so, let me know, because I have a few ideas written down myself, and I'm sure they'd be just as fun to draw as these guys were. For now though, thank you very much for tuning in, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye bye.